The Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society podcast.
Welcome to the Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society, a podcast dedicated to suspense, crime, and horror stories from the golden age of radio. I'm Eric.
I'm Tim.
And I'm Joshua.
We love mysterious old-time radio stories, but do they stand the test of time? That's what we're here to find out.
This week, I chose an episode from CBS Radio Workshop entitled The Enormous Radio.
In 1936, CBS Radio debuted a new series called Columbia Workshop. The network envisioned the workshop as an incubator for radio talent, a venue where artists could experiment with new ideas and techniques without the creative and budgetary restrictions of a sponsor.
20 years later, the network revived Columbia Workshop as CBS Radio Workshop. The new version of the acclaimed series was designed to be just as experimental as the original. By the mid-1950s, television had all but replaced radio as the country's dominant form of entertainment. The network hoped CBS Radio Workshop could lure discerning Americans back to the radio with the promise of mature and innovative content.
Writer-director Anthony Ellis adapted The Enormous Radio from a short story by John Cheever, first published in the May 17, 1947 issue of The New Yorker. It was the title story for Cheever's 1953 collection, The Enormous Radio and Other Stories, and singled out for publication in that year's edition of The Best American Short Stories. Cheever's biographer, John E. O'Hara, considered The Enormous Radio the author's most imaginative story, noting how it blends realism and fantasy to illuminate the darker regions of the human psyche.
CBS Radio Workshop was the first radio adaptation of the story, but not the last. In 1985, the CBC's experimental radio drama Vanishing Point brought The Enormous Radio to Canadian listeners. 6 years later, the BBC would present its own version as part of a series called City Plays.
And now let's listen to The Enormous Radio from CBS Radio Workshop, starring Stacey Harris, Virginia Gregg, and William Conrad. First broadcast May 11th, 1956.
It's late at night, and a chill has set in. You're alone, and the only light you see is coming from an antique radio. Listen to the sounds coming from the speaker, listen to the music, and listen to the voices.
CBS Radio presents the CBS Radio Workshop, dedicated to man's imagination, the theater of the mind. Tonight, The Enormous Radio, based on John Cheever's extraordinary short story, which originally appeared in the pages of the New Yorker magazine.
Irene, don't you want to hear the Workshop? It's a pretty good show.
Oh, I feel like music, don't you? It's the Schubert Ferellum, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, leave it on. A little louder, though, will you?
Jem and Irene Westcott were the kind of people who seemed to strike that satisfactory average of income, endeavor, and respectability that is reached by the statistical reports and college alumni bulletins. They differed from their friends, their classmates, and their neighbors only in an interest they shared in serious music. They went to a great many concerts, although they seldom mentioned this to anyone, and they spent a good deal of time listening to music on the radio. Now, their radio was an old instrument, sensitive, unpredictable, and beyond repair. And when it faltered, Jem would strike at the side of the cabinet with his hand. Well, this sometimes helped. But one Sunday afternoon,
Darling, the radio.
Oh, Lord. No, this time it's finished.
Bang it again.
Oh, it's finished. It's just burned out.
Might not be. How do you know? Try reversing the plug or something.
But it won't do any good. It's a miracle it lasted this long.
Well, let me try.
That's not going to do any good now.
A woman's touch.
All right. Why don't you sit down? It'll... See, there it goes.
It's so aggravating. And of course it had to happen while they were playing the Schubert.
Take it easy.
Well, it makes me mad. We knew this was going to happen. We should have done something.
I told you what the repairman said, honey. It'd cost almost as much to fix it as to buy a new one.
Darling, couldn't we get a new one?
I don't know. We agreed to get along with this until we could get a good hi-fi with some FM.
Please. It's not going to be much fun without music.
All right. All right, dear. I'll look around tomorrow, see what I can find.
The next day, on Monday, when he came home from work, he told her that he'd got one. He refused to describe it and said that it would be a surprise for her when it came. The radio was delivered the following afternoon, and with the assistance of her maid and the handyman, Irene uncrated
You
it
hold this, Emma.
Oh, yes,
and
ma'am.
brought it into the
Take
living
your
room.
stuff in the kitchen later.
Oh, this sure is a
Not
heavy
a very
one.
pretty cabinet.
Oh, ma'am, look at all the dials on it. I never could get the hang of that.
Well, it shouldn't be too difficult, I suppose. Volume, treble boost, bass boost, tuning, shortwave, band 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, well, this must be the switch to turn it on. Yes. Plug it in now, will you, Emma?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
All right. Probably takes a minute to warm up.
My, it is loud, isn't it, ma'am? Much louder than the old one.
Yes. It'll take a little getting used to, tuning it in.
My, you certainly do know how to find good music, I'll say.
It is nice. Well, we'd better see about getting supper now.
Yes, ma'am.
She sat down to listen, feeling once again complete. The music came through clearly. The new instrument had a much purer tone, she thought, than the old one. Well, she decided that tone was most important, and she could conceal the ugly gumwood cabinet behind a sofa. But as soon as she'd made her peace with the radio, the interference began.
Oh, dear. And they call this hi-fi.
Nothing she did with the switches and dials dimmed the interference. As she sat down again, disappointed and bewildered, and tried to trace the flight of the melody. The elevator shaft in her building ran beside the living room wall, and it was the noise of the elevator that gave her a clue to the character of the static. The rattling of the elevator cables were reproduced in her loudspeaker. And realizing that the radio was sensitive to electrical currents of all sorts, she began to discern through the Mozart the various other sounds. By listening more carefully, she was able to distinguish doorbells, elevator bells, electric razors, and wearing mixers picked up from the apartments that surrounded her. The powerful and ugly instrument, with its mistaken sensitivity to discord, was more than she could hope to master, so she turned the thing off.
Hello?
Hello, Irene. Did it get there?
Oh, the radio. Yes, dear.
Oh, how do you like it?
Well, it's fine, but...
But what?
Well, there's all kinds of sounds, noises coming through.
What do you mean? Like static?
Well, yes, but more like real noises.
Hmm?
I think it's picking up all the electric things in the building. Bells, vacuums,
Well,
telephones.
you better not fool with it until I get home. It probably needs a ground or something.
All right. I think it's wonderful, dear. Much nicer than the old one. When it's clear, the music sounds beautiful.
Oh, good. Well, I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.
When Jim Westcott came home that night, he went to the radio confidently, worked the controls.
The low-pressure area, which developed over the southwest yesterday, is moving rapidly toward the north and east, with lower temperatures following.
What the devil?
That's what I was telling
The
you.
city's current reading is 58. Kansas City, 54.
He fiddled with the knobs.
Chicago, 54. Detroit, 55.
Couldn't get rid of the noise.
54 and rainy. Toledo, 56.
And he turned the radio off.
What the heck with it, huh? I'll call the fellow who sold it to me in the morning. He's going to hear something from me.
The following day, Irene had a luncheon date and did some shopping during the afternoon. It was late when she returned home, and she didn't have a chance to turn on the radio, although the maid informed her that a man had come and fixed it. She busied herself with the children, seeing to their baths and bedtime. When Jim came home that night, he was tired and took a shower and changed his clothes, and then he joined Irene in the living room. He had just turned on the radio when the maid announced dinner, so he left it on, and he and Irene went to the table.
I saw the sweetest dress this afternoon. Of course, I didn't buy
Well,
it,
that's
but
just as well. I mean, we better go slow for a bit.
Hard day, dear.
Yeah, you had a rotten day.
Music does sound nice, doesn't it?
Very nice.
For heaven's sake, Kathy, do you always have to play the piano when I get home?
Well, it's the only chance I have. I'm at the office all day.
So am I. I wish you'd.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, but it's probably a play.
I don't think it is a play.
What's the matter? Where are you going?
I want to see what that was.
Well, try another station.
This country.
Hey, have you seen my garters?
Button me up.
I said, have you seen my garters?
Just button me up and I'll find your garters.
All right, all right.
Is that a radio show?
I don't know.
Here, let me see.
I wish you wouldn't leave apple cores in the ashtray. I hate the smell.
The devil is this?
On the coast of Coromandel, where the early pumpkins blow, in the middle of the woods lived the Yonghy-Bonghy Beau. 2 old chairs and half a candle, 1 old jug without a handle.
Lord, that's
These
the Sweeney's
were
nurse.
What?
Turn that thing
goods.
off. Maybe they can hear us. That was Miss Armstrong, the Sweeney's nurse. She must be reading to the little girl. They live in 17B. I've talked to her in the park. I know her voice. We must be getting other people's apartments.
That's impossible.
Well, that was Sweeney's nurse. I know her voice. I know it very
All right, now,
well.
wait a minute.
Lady Jingly, sitting where the pumpkins blow.
Maybe they can hear
You can't
us.
Be my
How can
wife. I'm tired of living singly on this
Hello?
coast so wild and singly.
Hello?
I'm weary of my life. If you'd come and be my wife,
I guess she
quite
can't hear us.
serene would
Try
be my
something
life.
else.
Right.
Eat some more sandwiches.
Oh, sure, I'd love some.
Those must be the Hutchinsons in 15B. I knew they were giving a party this afternoon. I saw her in the liquor store. Isn't this divine? Try something else.
All right, wait a
See if
minute,
you
wait
can
a
get
minute.
those people in 18C.
Yeah, I was using fly, and the other fellow's using salmon.
2 no Trump.
Pass.
3 no trouble.
Double.
And look at George in the grass skirt. Isn't that...
The Westcotts overheard that evening a monologue on salmon fishing in Canada, a bridge game, running comments on home movies, and a bitter family quarrel about an overdraft at the bank. They turned off the radio at midnight, went to bed, weak with laughter. Sometime in the night, their son began to call for a glass of water, and Irene got one and took it into his room. It was very early. From his window, all the lights in the neighborhood were extinguished. She went into the living room and turned on the radio.
Are you all right, darling?
Yes. I'm all right, I guess. But you know, Charlie, I don't feel like myself anymore. Sometimes there are only, about 15 or 20 minutes in the week when I feel like myself. I don't like to go to another doctor. The doctor bills are so awful already, but I just don't feel like myself, Charlie. I just never feel like myself.
Oh, dear. How sad. How terribly sad.
The following morning, after her children and husband had been carried away in the elevator, she went into the living room and tried the radio again.
You are going to school this morning, my girl, and that's all there is to it. Look, we paid $800 to get you into that school, and you'll go if it kills you.
If you think he's so hot, why don't you just tell us?
Oh, sure. I can just see you. You'd like that, wouldn't you? That's what you're waiting for. You'd like me to do something like that, the kind of thing you've been doing.
Huh?
You think I don't know? You think I don't smell that perfume on you when you get home from work? Work? You think I haven't seen the lipstick on your handkerchief?
That's
you
the
look through
Johnsons.
my pockets again, I'll break your arm. Thanks for a lousy breakfast and indigestion. I may see you tonight and I may not.
Go on. Get out. Go on. Stay out all night.
Maybe I will.
Irene shifted the control and invaded the privacy of several breakfast tables. She overheard demonstrations of indigestion, love, abysmal vanity, faith, and despair. Her life was nearly as simple and sheltered as it appeared to be, and the forthright and sometimes brutal language that came from this loudspeaker the morning there astonished and troubled her. She continued to listen until her maid came in, and then she turned the radio off quickly, since this insight, she realized, was a furtive one. She had a luncheon date with a friend that day and didn't get home until after 2:30. For some reason, she felt strangely disturbed.
Hello.
Oh, hello, dear. I expected Miss Cummings.
No, she's out getting me some coffee, honey.
My, what an efficient secretary.
Something wrong?
No. You won't forget we're going out for dinner tonight.
No, I won't forget. Look, dear, I'm rather busy.
Oh, I'm sorry, dear.
No, that's all right.
Oh, the funniest thing.
What?
When I went out for lunch, there were some people in the apartment elevator. It was the funniest thing. I kept
Honey,
wondering...
will you tell me about it later? I haven't got time now. Huh? I'll see you about 7.
Best scotch to anyone who hasn't white hair. And see if you can get rid of that liver paste before you pass those hot things.
As the afternoon waned, the conversations increased in intensity. On her radio, she could hear the arrival of cocktail guests, the return of children and businessmen from their schools and offices. The voices swirled around her.
I found a good-sized diamond on the bathroom floor this morning. What? It must have fallen out of that bracelet Mrs. Dunstan was wearing last night.
Let me see it.
Here it is.
We'll sell it. We'll take it down to the jeweler on Madison Avenue and sell it. Well, Mrs. Dunstan won't know the difference, and we could use a couple of $100, I'll tell you.
No. How horrible.
Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clemens. Halfpence and farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me, say the bells at Old Bailey.
It's not a hat. It's not a hat. It's a love affair. Oh, that's what Walter Florell said. He said it's not a hat. It's a love affair.
talk to somebody, honey. Talk to somebody. If she catches you standing here not talking to anyone, she'll take us off her invitation list, and I love these parties.
I hate these things. I think they stink.
I love them.
The Westcotts were going out for dinner, and when Jim came home, Irene was dressing. She seemed sad and vague, and he brought her a drink. They were dining with friends in the neighborhood, and they walked to where they were going. It was one of those splendid spring evenings that excite memory and desire. And the air that touched their hands and faces felt very soft. A Salvation Army band was on the corner playing.
They're really such nice people, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
They have such nice faces. Actually, they're so much nicer than a lot of people we know.
She took a bill out of her purse and walked over and dropped it into the tambourine. There was in her face, when she returned to her husband, a look of radiant melancholy that he was not familiar with. And her conduct at the dinner party seemed strange to him, too. She interrupted her hostess,
I don't agree with you. I think you're absolutely wrong. Completely wrong.
stared at people across the table from her with an intensity for which she would have punished her children. She waited that night until Jim had fallen asleep, and then went into the living room and turned on the radio.
Oh, I'm so tired. I'm absolutely dead.
Well, maybe if we could get home one night in the week before 1 o'clock, you wouldn't be so tired.
I know, but we had to go to the party, and I don't want to play that record.
The next day, she had a slight headache and didn't keep an appointment she had. At 2 o'clock, Jim called her from the office.
Everything all right?
Oh, yes, I suppose so.
Aren't you feeling well?
I've got a bit of a headache.
No. What'd you find out about the car?
No, I didn't.
Well, I asked you to be sure to, honey. We won't get it until tomorrow now. Now, will you please call them right away and tell them I've got to have it by tomorrow?
Yes.
Irene, did you hear me?
I said yes.
What's the matter with you?
I've got a headache.
You've been listening to that radio all morning, haven't you? Now, look, fun's fun, but you're running it into the ground, honey. It's not good for you. Now, please, keep the thing off, will you?
All right.
You promise?
All right.
Jim came home at about 6 that night. Emma, the maid, let him in, and he had taken off his hat and was taking off his coat when Irene ran into the hall.
Go up to 16C, Jim.
What?
Don't take off your coat. Go up to 16C. Mr. Osborne's beating his wife. They've been quarreling since 4 o'clock, and now he's hitting her. Go up there and stop it.
Cut it out. Stop it. You don't have to listen to this sort of thing, you know. It's indecent. It's like looking in windows. You know you don't have to listen to this sort of thing. You can just turn it off.
Horrible. It's so dreadful. I've been listening all day.
Honey, why do you listen to it? Why? I bought the filthy thing to give you some pleasure. I paid a lot for it. I thought it might make you happy. I wanted to make you happy.
No. Don't quarrel with me, please. Please. All the others have been quarreling all day. Everybody's quarreling. They're all worried about money. Mrs. Hutchinson's mother's dying in Florida, and they don't have enough money to send her to the Mayo Clinic. And Mrs. Melville has heart trouble, and some woman is playing around with the superintendent. It's disgusting. And Mr. Hendricks is going to lose his job. And that girl who plays the Missouri Waltz all the time. And Mr. Osborne beating Mrs. Osborne.
Irene, listen to me. Why do you have to turn it on? Why do you have to listen to that stuff? It makes you so miserable.
No, don't. Life is too terrible. It's too sordid and too awful. But we've never been like that, have we, darling? Have we? I mean, we've always been good and decent and loving, haven't we? And we have 2 children. Beautiful children. Our lives aren't sordid, are they, darling? Are they? We're happy, aren't we? We are happy.
Of course we're happy, darling. Of course. Now, Look, I'll have the fool radio fixed or taken away tomorrow. Come on. Come on, it's all right, honey. It's all right.
You love me, don't you? And we're not hypercritical or worried about money or dishonest, are we?
No. Darling, no.
A man came in the morning and fixed the radio. And Irene was happy to hear a recording of the Beethoven Ninth, including Schiller's Ode to Joy. She kept the radio on all day, and nothing untoward came from the speaker. Debussy's La Mer was being played when Jim came home, and they went into dinner. His face was pale, she thought.
I paid the bill for the radio today. It was $400. I just hope you get some enjoyment out of it.
I'm sure I will, darling.
Well, $400 is a good deal more than I can afford. But I wanted to get something you'd enjoy. It's the last extravagance we'll be able to indulge ourselves in this year.
All right, dear, of course. I understand.
Maureen, by the way, I noticed you hadn't paid your clothing bills yet. I saw them on your dressing table.
Oh, I suppose I must have forgotten.
Well, why did you tell me you'd paid them? Why did you lie to me?
Well, I just didn't want to worry you, Jim. I'll be able to pay my bills out of this month's allowance. There were slip covers last month from that party we had to give.
Well, you just got to learn to handle the money I give you a little more intelligently, Irene.
Yes, darling, I will. I really will.
You just got to understand that we won't have as much money this year as we had last, right? I had a very sobering talk with Mitchell today. No one's buying anything. We're spending all our time promoting new issues, and you know how long that takes. I'm not getting any younger, you know. I'm 37, and I haven't done as well as I hoped I'd do. I don't suppose things will get any better.
Yes, dear.
We just got to start cutting down. Start thinking of the children. To be perfectly frank with you, I worry about money a great deal. I'm not at all sure of the future. No one is. I've worked very hard to give you and the children a comfortable life, and I don't like to see all that energy wasted in fur coats, radios, and slip covers.
Please, Jim, please, they'll hear us.
Who'll hear us? Emma can't hear us.
The radio.
Radio? I'm sick of it. I'm sick to death of you. That radio can't hear us. Nobody can hear us. And what if they can hear us? Who cares? Why are you so holier than thou all of a sudden? What's turned you overnight into a nice girl? You stole your mother's jewelry before they probated a will. You never gave your sister a cent of that money that was intended for her. Not even when she needed it.
Irene stood for a minute before the hideous radio, disgraced and sickened, but she held her hand on the switch before she extinguished the music, hoping that the instrument might speak to her kindly, that she might hear the Sweeney's nurse. And as she turned the dial, the voice on the radio was suave and noncommittal.
Buffalo. A fire in a hospital near Buffalo for the care of blind children was put out early this morning. There were several injuries, but no fatalities. And that's the news. The temperature downtown is 64. Humidity, 90. And now an interlude of music.
The CBS Radio Workshop has presented The Enormous Radio by John Cheever, produced and directed by Anthony Ellis. The script was adapted for radio by Mr. Ellis. The cast included William Conrad, Virginia Gregg, Stacey Harris, Eve McVeigh, Hans Conried, Charlotte Lawrence, Joseph Kearns, Paula Winslow, Herb Butterfield, Helen Klebe, George Walsh, and Irene Tedrow. Special effects were by Robert Chadwick, Bill James, and Clark Casey. This is Hugh Douglas inviting you to join us again next week when from New York we present a special production by the Helen Hayes Drama Group, Lovers, Villains, and Fools, with the famous actress as narrator. The title of the piece is derived from the three principal categories of character portrayals, which are basic equipment for which members of this theater group strive. The narration is written by Albert G. Miller. Special music has been composed and will be conducted by Alex Steinert. That's next week on the CBS Radio Workshop. How many people are there in a crowd of 10 million? Do you have any picture in your mind, or is that figure too overwhelming? Well, 10 million is more people than there are in Chicago, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles combined. And that's how many men, women, and children in our country are suffering from some form of mental illness. Yes, 10 million. Among that 10 million, maybe there's someone you know, a neighbor, friend, or a relative. So you see, mental illness is a problem that concerns us all. And that's why we are all being asked to give to our local mental health campaign to fight mental illness. The best weapon is research. Research to find out how to prevent mental illness. Your doctors can be helped by your dollars. They can learn enough to really lick this number one problem, mental illness. The victims of mental illness need your help desperately. Give to your local mental health campaign. Stay tuned for 5 minutes of CBS News, to be followed on most of these same stations by My Son Jeep. America listens most to the CBS Radio Network.
That was The Enormous Radio from CBS Radio Workshop here on the Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society podcast. Once again, I'm Eric.
I'm Tim.
And I'm Joshua.
And that was Joshua's pick, bringing that to us this week. Correct me on this one. This is always old man remembering time on this podcast, but I know we've done a Columbia Workshop. Have we done CBS?
We've done lots of, well, no, not lots of CBS Radio Workshop on the main podcast. The one I remember for sure is Brave New World, parts 1 and 2. We have done most of our CBS Radio Workshop listening on the Patreon bonus episodes because it is such an eclectic series. A lot of them fall outside the genre range of the main podcast. And for the patrons, we do some oddball stuff occasionally, and we go a little farther afield.
Right.
So maybe you want to become a patron.
Yeah, to hear the CBS Radio Workshops we've done. And then I'm going to become a patron so I can listen to them and remember what it was we did. Yeah, so by all accounts from the information provided at the top of the podcast here, this is considered a piece of American classic literature as a short story.
Yeah, it's often collected in best of short story literature collections, as we mentioned in the opening, and John Cheever is recognized as a prominent mid-century American writer.
Fantastic. I didn't know any of that. I just sat down and listened to a radio show about a radio.
Yeah, I mean, that you don't have to bring that into your enjoyment or not of this radio show. The radio show was likely aimed at some people who were aware of Cheever at the time, but some people who'd never heard it.
I guess what I'm saying is if I had known that heading into this, I'd be like, okay, this is a classic piece of American short story literature by a well-renowned author. I think that changes your outlook.
Stories are never created to be well-regarded and respected stories. They're created to be a good story that sometime later become respected.
Yeah.
So in some ways, adapting something to be the well-respected version of the story is different than just adapting the story.
Yes.
Are you saying there's a danger of becoming pretentious in your adaptation?
Well, no. When those were written, they were written to be like, do people like this? Is this good?
Right.
But no, it's not judgmental at all. It's just interesting.
I will give my big picture, too long didn't listen analysis of recognizing the shtick, not the shtick is the wrong word, but the idea of like, look what we did there of this is about people who listen to other people's horrible things going on in their lives and now you're listening to the horrible things going on in our lives. You get it? And yeah, yes, I get it. And I really liked it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not proud that I am not going to judge you for being pretty on the nose, but I don't judge you because I really liked it.
Yeah, and part of the on the nose thing is simply adapting the story for radio.
Yeah.
Like, you're almost like
that
missing,
choice does it.
And you're missing a beat if you don't do a little playing with it, like they do in the opening, where we get the static of the radio dial turning, and then we get the announcement, and then more static and music, and we find out that, oh, they're listening to CBS Radio Workshop, and they decide not to listen to it. Let's do music instead. That's a great moment.
Yep.
It's willingness to experiment, but it's also that nice situation that I love about art, is when your back's against the wall, television is just sucking all the advertising dollars out of radio, and you're in a bad spot. That sometimes produces really interesting stuff and innovation. It didn't save radio, as it turns out, but it left us with some of the best radio there is.
Right.
Is this time when they were paying the talent they could find to do whatever they wanted to try to impress and bring people back to the radio. It reminded me of House on Fire, which is an Arch Obler adaptation of his own novel from the 60s, which we discussed on a Patreon-only episode. And it reminded me of it because it uses one fantastical device to illuminate the human condition and family dysfunction. And it's really naturalistic, other than this one
and to
device.
Focus on this community of people in a very confined area.
Yeah, in an apartment building, just like in House on Fire. Yeah. So it almost feels like an early, I know this term is so huge and has been misapplied and abused, but magical realism. It feels a little like that.
There's just enough of the the electricity and the wires and the all the electrical things that run through the whole building, that's what make the magic things happen. And like, good enough, I'll go with that. The electrical circulatory system throughout the whole building is what is allowing this radio to feed other people's lives through its speakers.
Yeah, I don't care at all. It's just like, it's such a great idea that I'm like, cool.
Actually does. College radio. I worked at a college radio station. We broadcast through the electrical current of the dormitories, meaning that it wasn't a broadcast signal. It meant that if you plugged your radio into an outlet, on that same electrical system, there was a radio current being carried that then that radio could pick up the college radio station on your radio. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So our
I don't know the exact physics of it, but
our
cool.
transmitter was just plugged in somehow, forgive the ignorance, to the electrical system of the dormitories. And the only way to get it is if you actually tapped into the electricity being fed. So they figured out a way to send the radio signal down the electrical wires.
That's cool.
Well, it's cool that he covers his bases. Like, you guys like that. I really love the poetic reasoning behind it. The powerful and ugly instrument with its mistaken sensibility to discord was more than she could master, so she turned the thing off. Like, it's sort of this ominous, powerful thing. But you're right that it also suggests some actual possible scientific mishap that's causing it.
Allows me to not wonder why the characters are accepting of this fantastical new thing. It's like, oh, that's why they're not bringing a priest in to exorcise it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I admit that could bother you and be a obstacle to it, but I feel like it's enough of a nod that you can get past it. And the ideas it introduces from there, to me, are just so fascinating, particularly from our contemporary time. I can't help but read this and think of social media, to think like she essentially gets into doom scrolling. She's horrified by what she's hearing, but she can't stop herself. She's up late at night every time she creeps past the radio and tuning in to hear more.
Well, it's a possible parallel that this is also the source that she used to go to for the thing that she loved most.
Mm-hmm.
And so that addicted repetition, like, I'm going to go to the radio, turn this on, and find something that makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
And when she can't get that, but can still go to the radio and get something, that's how it becomes an ugly addiction.
Again, I will strain this social media metaphor, perhaps, but again, we all loved it. It started out so fun. You're connected to your friends.
If I could just get 1 in 6 cute puppy videos,
yes.
It'll sustain me.
We wanted to believe that this sort of the beautiful version of everything, like the music, and like what she believes about her neighbors when she just passes them in the hall. But then we got the ugly side.
That nurse who's reading to the kids.
Yeah, so somewhere in that, like, intermittent reinforcement of so many things we get addicted to, right? There's that one little sweetness somewhere in there that is a balm to you, but you've got to go through the horror to get there.
Part of what I liked about this show was beat for beat, I kind of know once you get to the point of like, I can hear into the private lives of other people. There's any number of ways that can be horrible, but it's going to be horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some ways it was like, oh, it's going to be that kind of story of I've seen too much. I have not respected their privacy, and it is its own punishment. But I think in the performances and the restraint with the pace they did with that, it wasn't horrible right away.
No, they spent the first night they went to bed just sore from laughing. It was just sort of like, oh, this is silly and funny, and I didn't know they were having a party, and they're kind of witty, funny drunks, and they mostly found it amusing.
So yeah, we said this at another episode not that long ago, but it's like this is one where I get the template and I can see it, but it's executed well and I'm enjoying it.
Right. Let George do it.
Yeah, that was the other. Thank you.
But what draws me to this story in a way, I mean, it's a horrible fascination, but that idea that something begins as a window, and then before you realize it, you're like, oh no, it's a mirror. And who I'm looking at and who I'm judging, am I like that? And so her trajectory to me felt so real and recognizable, even though it's in this sort of really fantastical situation. And I don't know who's to side with more. The husband who just tunes it all out, because maybe that is for the best, but he seems kind of cold and unfeeling, and in tuning it out becomes it. Mm-hmm. At the end, because he doesn't have
the insight.
He's shutting himself off from that potential self-knowledge, but also that view into their lives and into her that she has is eating her up. Her husband's not wrong in that too, that it's becoming an obsession.
Well, now I feel like I have to go home and argue with my wife. I'm not sure what we're going to argue about. She'll tell me.
Then you can disagree with what you're arguing about.
Hey, what are we arguing about? Are we arguing? Okay. No? Yes?
Monty Python? I paid for an argument. No, you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of flip side of judge not lest you be judged kind of idea where, don't judge people because you're a hypocrite, but also there's a self-serving version of that where because by not judging others, it allows you to feel okay about not judging yourself either. And it just sort of sends chills down my spine every time I hear this story, because as they fall apart and things get ugly at the end, it just feels like everyone has had those ugly moments with people they love that you wish you could take back. And this seems to sort of rub that in your face. Not only can you not take it back sometimes, but now this idea that someone out there heard it or saw it or knows that dark, secret, bad thing you did.
And to pivot, and this is probably endemic of CBS Radio Workshop, the production is so good.
Mm-hmm.
When they turn the new radio on for the first time, the music is so much more clear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too loud at first. It has to jump up in volume.
It's great. Like they're telling the story with just the audio cues.
Yep.
And the first time they realize they're hearing what sounds like a mundane conversation, not a radio show, it's that great moment where they're at dinner, they're having a conversation, and there's piano music in the background for most of that scene. And then you hear the argument about, stop playing that piano every day when I come home from work. And you realize, we've been hearing that even sooner than we think.
Yeah.
Like we've bled into that scene earlier and then been drawn into it. And then it forces us to retroactively reappreciate the scene.
Like, has there ever been an orchestra in this apartment building the whole time?
And I also like how it gradually gets more caustic between them, right? Because I think it would be too trite. I think you said this, that it takes its time.
Yeah.
There's one time where she calls him at work and he's, just in that mundane way we all are. Like, I can't talk to you about it right now. I am really busy, and it's really nice. And then later he calls her and it gets much sharper and a little nastier, and they snap at each other. And then they go out together later, and she gets a little weird with other people at the party. She's more argumentative, and
and that's that narrative, guilt-ridden. Like, I know all of you too well, and you don't know that I know it. And
she's fighting with the radio shows she's been hearing, and that beautiful moment when she sees the people collecting money for the Salvation Army, and she just has that wistful romanticizing of them. Mm-hmm. They'd probably go home, and if she could listen on their radio, what arguments they have, but it's that desperate need to get that pure music back on the radio again, or to get the goodness she naively clung to back. So, Eric, what did you think? We're just yammering on.
I thought it was fantastic. I know there's a lot of layers and metaphors and social media similarities, and I see all that. But if you don't analyze it and you're just like, this radio is picking up other people's conversations in the apartment and they're listening to them. And what is the horror of that? What is the suspense of that? What is the journey of that story? I think it was, first of all, really well produced and really well acted. And I think it's a really interesting story of the inability to turn it off and how it's destroying you.
If you are in my house and you go out the back door onto the back porch, across the alley is the back face of an apartment building. So I can step out and see like 4 or 5 different floors of people's windows. This episode made me think of that, I don't often go out there with binoculars and staring at people's windows, but when I step outside, I can see through all these
rear
rooms.
window.
Yeah.
Rear Window is very similar to this. And that's kind of what I was expecting to happen. Like
I was too, yeah.
They were going to overhear a murder or some kind of crime. They kind of did. The guy that wouldn't return the diamond, or
the guy beating his wife.
Beating his wife.
Horrible
right?
scene.
Yeah, that's horrible. But it's a lot of Rear Window to it. Like, I shouldn't be, so should I get involved? And I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stop doing this.
I can't draw your curtains for you.
Yeah, it's very interesting how when we made it, the technology available that we can go hide in a closet in our home and spy on people and their lives because they're willing to open their curtains and tell us what kind of pancakes they had this morning and take pictures of their food.
It's the flip side, too, of like, I don't have to look out back. You don't have to log on and look.
I think it's interesting, though, that it's been gradual, but slowly I have been, Facebook, for example, I was really into it for a long time, and it has slowly become, here's my next show. That's the only thing I'll post. I won't read it. The point is, and I think Joshua brought it up earlier, how exciting it was when it started and how it devolved into a nightmare. I think it's really interesting how much we think we want to know what's going on in everybody's lives, but we really don't.
Until we find out what's going on in everybody's lives.
It's
like, be careful what you wish for.
I like your, I guess analysis is the right word, but that it's more of a mirror than a window. I think that's really interesting observation about this piece in general.
Well, the irony is it becomes way more terrifying of a story once you discover it's not about overhearing a murder or a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's about them. And then, of course, you can't help but think about yourself, right? And what lies you tell yourself or what naive ideas you have about who you are as a person.
But there's something also comforting in the idea that if I heard all those arguments and all that crap going on, that I go, oh, good, my family's normal. But for these people, their life was so happy and they loved each other. Like they had no issues until this thing turned on.
Not entirely, though. That revolves around the ending, right? Like some of it is her
interpretation.
She hasn't examined it because when he turns on her and starts saying, you took all that jewelry from your mother's house before
they're holding
it
in
for the will.
Right.
You never gave any of that money to your sister when she could really, really use it.
Right.
And in the story, it's the 50s, so they can't end on it. He's brutal. In the story, he ends on throwing an abortion in her face that she had at some point earlier in marriage. So what you find out is that stuff is there, and that stuff is in everyone's life.
The difference between The joy of finding out other people have these problems too, thank heavens, is when you find out because you have a conversation with them versus when you dig through their trash.
Yeah, okay. I find this part of this conversation really fascinating. There's strength, hope in finding out you're not alone in something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But you have to acknowledge that you're in something. And I think the critical thing is and I think the story, there's a line from the narrator about that she was very naive and didn't have this self-awareness. Right. And so I think that's the painful part, is she's coming to that realization. And maybe that's where she'll find peace, is that she's not alone. But the horror of the story is having that realization for the first time, I think. Right. So she's not in a place to get the peace from like Misery Loves Company piece of it yet.
Yeah, I will say that social media in general, and I don't do it much anymore for a lot of reasons, but there was a point where I was getting satisfaction of, oh my God, my life's great. You people are struggling. I just can't find my keys. I'm okay.
But in some ways, that's captured in their first night of just laughing at everybody. The joy at other people's suffering isn't really nourishing or long-lasting, and that wears off really fast.
There's an argument between a couple that there's no stakes to the argument. It's just like pointlessly needlessly like,
yeah, your breakfast stunk. And
yeah, which I can see like, well, that's hilarious. You two are, but that it's only with a little bit more context, a little bit more, a second look that you see like, oh, that's kind of horrible.
I think it flips when she gets up in the middle of the night and hears that sad conversation of the woman is coughing and her husband asks her, are you okay? And she's just like, I just don't feel good.
I only 15 minutes a week do I feel like myself.
Yeah. And it's just this quiet, desperate, depressing moment. And that's kind of when Irene's perspective flips.
Overall, I think we had this happen a few weeks ago with our X-1 episode, where an old story, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, has so much poignancy and so much, wow, that really applies to today. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that this particular episode made me realize, wow, we just don't change. I don't think it's that amazing that we're looking at that and going, oh, wow, look at how close that is to this. Or,
yeah, social media is just another version of the same thing.
Another version of the same thing. So we can look at things and go, wow, they really predicted the future. Or the same things still apply. Isn't that weird? And there's a lot of stories like that. What I'm getting at is I've reached this point of, I don't think that's that amazing anymore. I'm starting to realize we just don't change. Situations change, perspective change, language changes. There's a lot of changes. But that's what I took from this, is this overwhelming sadness of, oh, we're kidding ourselves. We don't change. We don't. You give us the opportunity to look into other people's lives. Look what it does to us. And there it is in that story. And there it was on Facebook. And you know what I mean? Like, humans are humans.
But that impulse, that quick impulse of like, oh, I can hear something. For me, it's also the same thing like living in an apartment building or a dorm where you're walking down the hall and you can hear through the door something. Yep. That impulse of, I want to put my ear to the door to hear what's actually happening. But it is this story again of like, I don't. If they want me to hear that, they can tell me.
But also sometimes it escalates to terrible things like the domestic abuse. And it's like, do you actually then get involved then? And can you really do anything meaningful in that moment? Obviously, I think hearing it today, his just turning it off and ignoring it completely is brutal.
Mm-hmm. But
you also know the outcome at that time, if he called the police, would probably not be much of anything.
I can't tell you how much horribleness that I have walked by, drove by, ignored that has been in my face because there's nothing I can do about it. I know that there are varying levels of when we should get involved in that, but it's hard.
I would say if there's a scrap of hopefulness to take from this, or
please give me one,
or not hopefulness, then instruction. I think one of the things in the story tells you that you hear these things, they're horrible. You see these things that are horrible. And sometimes you're right, there's nothing you can do about it. But the one thing you can do about it, and the thing that she was not doing and her husband is not doing either, is that you can look at yourself, because you can change yourself. I mean, that is where you have some power. And
also to be the beacon, like to be that voice that is reading to their kids. So that if someone is listening to what you're saying in your own life, in line with what you were saying, Joshua, of what they see from you is something that will be helpful to them.
And the question being, when she turns on the radio and it's that news report that is just delivering good news and bad news with no real emotional attachment. There was a fire near a children's hospital. Oh no, but it was quickly put out. It's 64 degrees out. Oh, that's pleasant. Humidity is 90. Oh, and then it goes to the musical interlude, which she used to take so much solace from. And I would like to go away thinking, oh, maybe she's not going to just turn on the radio and not think anymore. She'll listen to that music, take some piece from it, but also do a little more introspection. Definitely her husband needs to. Jerk. We've gone really long. There's so much great stuff in here, and it's obviously tons to talk about. The one last thing I want to point out that's a little nerdy fun thing is the nurse is reading this poem, The Courtship of Yongi Bongi Bo or something, and it's this total absurdist little children's
Eddie's
thing.
father.
Yeah, The Courtship of Eddie's father.
Couldn't come up with it.
And she's looking for that again, right? We talk about the piece of it, and then I thought it was fun that when it comes back around, and you hear her again, she's reading something much darker. She's reading the Oranges and Lemons.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that she doesn't say it, but it ends with, here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes the chopper to chop off your head. So it's this much darker poem. So she's even robbed of that little bit of security when she's looking for the Sweeney's nurse's soothing voice again.
Should we vote?
Yeah.
Sure.
Tim?
Stands the test of time.
Yes.
It's because it is innovative and as it is meant to be, which makes me wonder, like, do innovative and classic go together? You're both looking at like I'm going to answer that. I don't know.
I'm looking at you like, yeah, of course it does.
I don't know that I'd call this a classic. And the reason being for that same thing that I was criticizing, Let George Do It. It is executed excellently. It has a lot of great ideas in it. The actual story is kind of like, no, it's that story.
Yep. I couldn't say it better. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was executed great. I loved the story. Unfortunately, triggered a landslide of bigger picture realizations for me of, why do we even try? Which was a sad half hour. But other than that, from the pure storytelling standpoint, I think it's good. I think it's really good. And I definitely stands the test of time. You could play that for anybody today, and I think it would be enjoyable. But I'm not sure I'd go classic as a piece of radio drama on its own.
I couldn't disagree with you guys more. I think this is such a classic, not just in this power of the script, the performances, the production values. We talked about Virginia Gregg a couple weeks ago, and I mean, her slow decline and mental agitation and anguish as this goes on is just devastating. And to me, for a 80-some-year-old piece of radio production and short story to still have such an impact, and to still be so meaningful this many years later, I mean, that to me is what classic is. Would you want to listen to it all the time? No, because it's pretty tough. But I think the original short story is a classic American short story, and CBS Radio Workshop is, I think, along with Crime Classics, one of those incredibly underrated shows. I think because it came toward the end of old time radio, and I just love it. It's one of those shows that even when it absolutely fails, you admire it because it failed not because it went for something old and tired. It's because it reached too far.
Tim, tell them stuff.
Hey, everybody. Please go visit GhoulishDelights.com, home of this podcast. You'll find other episodes there, lots of other episodes. You can comment. You can let us know what you thought about these episodes. You can vote in polls if you just want to say classic, not classic, sensitive time. You have options. You don't have to just invent things. You can also link to our social media pages. You know, for that quagmire that we've just been talking about. You can link to our Threadless store, buy some swag. That always feels nice. That's a positive experience, buying t-shirts. Or you can link to our Patreon page.
You can go to patreon.com/themorals and support this podcast. It is an awesome place to go to give us money. That's the long and short of it. So go check it out. We have bonus podcasts. We have Zoom happy hours. We have so many fun things. Become a member of the mysterious old radio listening society at patreon.com/themorals.
And if you'd like to see us performing live, the Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society Theater Company does live recreations on stage of classic old-time radio shows and also a lot of our own original work. Come see us perform audio drama live on stage, just like they did in the old days, with Foley and people talking in different voices. That's us. But we're performing somewhere monthly, and you can find out where we're performing and what we're performing and how to get tickets by going to GhoulishDelights.com or MysteriousOldRadioListeningsociety.com, and there you'll see all of that information. Come see us, and if you can't, if you're a Patreon, we film it, and that's part of your Patreon perk. You get to watch that. But if you are in the area, you have no excuse. You should come say hi to us at least and have dinner and watch a show.
No excuse.
No excuse.
We're mad at you ahead of time.
Yeah.
Come see the show.
What is next?
Next, we have a listener request. We will be listening to an episode of Suspense entitled The Diary of Sophronia Winters. Until then...
Look out! Thanks for a lousy breakfast and indigestion. I may see you tonight and I may not.
Go on. Get out. Go on. Stay out all night.
Maybe I will.
I'm going to start inviting people to link to our anti-social media page.
Yeah, we should.